Welcome back to One Winning Pod. Man, the streak is hella broken, guys. I thought it might be like a little blip, but no, not a little blip. This is a full-on crisis. We're never going to win a preseason game again. But that's okay. We're not going to talk too much about the game because it's kind of one of those things that doesn't really matter. It's more about the roster decisions at this point. So we'll sprinkle in a little bit of like how that game may have impacted some of these decisions. But I think we're all anticipating Tuesday at 4. This episode, you'll probably almost definitely will be listening to it on Tuesday. Sneak it in before 4, and life will be good. But we're just going to go in a very basic order, like kind of from quarterback all the way down through the roster. And let's start with the quarterback competition, which I think is kind of clear as mud. I thought Josh Johnson had an incredible drive to open up the game. And shout out to Coach Evans with his spacing video that he put up, kind of going play by play. Gives you a little glimpse of maybe what we're going to be doing in the regular season, which makes you super excited with the A-team out there. But, Josh Johnson, like, methodically, so is that even a word? Methodically picked apart the defense, checking his reads, making great throws, and he's cheaper than Huntley. They're both one-year options at this point. I still think that they will go Huntley, but part of me had this hunch of like, ooh, do you like keep all of them and then put Huntley on the IR for 4 games because he's like dealing with that injury to try to like protect Josh Johnson for a little longer? I don't know. I didn't end up doing that in my roster prediction for what it's worth, but it was something I thought of.
All right, so maybe you could say that was an interesting pronunciation of mythically. Mythically, that's even that takes a couple beers to get it to that one. Which,
I've had 0 beers.
Either way, and as as good as Josh Johnson has looked the past 2 games, I don't think that we're going to call those mythic moments out there with Josh Johnson. But I mean, first off, though, before we talk about the backup quarterback position, I think we just got to step back and just appreciate who QB1 is on this roster and how it's a known thing. And we're not talking about this or that. And this time last year was the start of a lot of us in the fan base, getting a little antsy of just not really knowing what's going to happen. I know that's far behind us. We don't want to think about it, but I think let's just take a moment, just appreciate it. Lamar's here. There's no questions. He's poised for a huge season in this Todd Monken offense. I think we're all excited about it. We've seen the new passing concepts. The spacing, like you said, is worlds of a difference than when Roman was here. It's going to be incredible to see this against Houston. I can't wait. But yeah, backup quarterback position, I think you hit the nail on the head. My opinion is it's going to be Huntley unless he's hurt. And then, he'll go to the IR and Johnson will be there for the initial first part of the season. I mean, it's just like Josh Johnson, he's what at this point? He's in his like
17th year, right?
17th year. He's 37 years old. It's incredible that he's been able to stick around this long, just being a trusted backup in the league, a guy that I guess coaches feel that like he can go in and run the offense. I mean, because you look at his career statistics, only 13 touchdown passes on 355 attempts. Completion percentage of 58. I just don't see how you're expecting anything out of this guy better than Huntley. I know that we have there's some shortcomings of Huntley. I just think what Josh Johnson is. Huntley could still improve a little bit. He knows the offense. He knows the players. The players know him. Hopefully we don't have to get there this year, but I wouldn't say shocked, but I'd be very surprised if the Ravens straight up go with Josh Johnson over Tyler Huntley. I think Huntley's spot on this roster is safe. And why did Josh Johnson play over Huntley in the preseason? I'm not sure, but maybe that was just, to send a message to Huntley and just be like, hey, we're expecting more from you. So this guy's going to go out and play the first team snaps. And you got to work on these things. I don't know, but I think it's going to be Huntley.
Fair enough. On to the running back situation. We didn't see any Akeem Mitchell, but I feel like he still has a roster spot here. So I had him in mind. I have 4 running backs What do you think, Peter? You think it's important we do that still?
He has to be there. We're going to talk about the quote-unquote handshake deals later, but you can't risk losing Mitchell to waivers because it's very likely some team will pick him up. I mean, these players didn't get drafted for a reason. Mitchell, I think the knock on him was, is he going to be able to break tackles? Is he really going to be able to be an inside runner? And to be fair, the big plays that we saw him break in the preseason, he was jutting to the outside and running along the sidelines. That's great. We can use that in the offense, but it does show, I think, that he has limited abilities at this point. But he's certainly a playmaker that we need to keep on this roster. So Dobbins and Edwards are obviously locks. Justice Hill, I think, has shown enough to be a lock as well. I think it would be a huge mistake by the Ravens if they leave Mitchell's status on this team to chance and don't have him on the initial roster.
Agreed. Well, the wide receiver competition was pretty straightforward from a long time. It really was just wide receiver 6 that seemed questionable, unless they, we talked about maybe they trade Duvernay, right? Like there's a world where you might want to trade him because you save some salary. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. That has to be happening, any minute now kind of thing. So it was all about wide receiver 6, and Wallace really showed up. You know that they need to have the special teams chops. He has that. But he really started to develop as a wide receiver. He had that really great catch across the middle, awesome hands grab. And I think that's one of those things that he's shown a lot of growth, I feel like, as a wide receiver. A lot of times we've gotten spoiled lately in the last maybe 5 years where wide receivers broke out after year 2. And now, or before that, it was 3 years. But, for a guy like Wallace, 4th round pick, coming back from injury as well, it's not that surprising that, maybe this is the year that he'll be a little bit more competent and more useful. And at this point, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw him in some sets, particularly if there's any injuries and you're down to he's now the 5th option. I could see him in some sets. So I'm really impressed with what I've seen from Wallace, and I think he gets wide receiver 6 all but locked up with even another great performance.
Isn't it crazy to think, let's take a moment here. Devin Duvernay is the longest tenured wide receiver on this team. I guess tied with Prochet, but Prochet is all but certainly going to another team, right? But it's crazy. Just 2020 draft pick, 3rd round at that. Very different wide receiver room. We said that's what we wanted to see after this past season, and that's definitely what we're getting. Yeah, so I mean, the thought came to my head when you were saying perhaps we could try and trade Duvernay, but you've got that veteran leadership there. He knows what it means to be a Raven. He's got to tell all these new guys what it means to be a Raven, I guess. But
well, and I think to be fair, what are you trading him for, right?
Exactly.
What are you trading him for? And then the next marginal guy you add on, it's not like we're scratching to be oh, we really want Treadwell,
Right. Yeah.
So it's it's not like we're really jonesing for that next 6 spot. We're all a tough decision. It's nah, we got the 6, we're good.
Yeah, we've seen this before with players like Chuck Clark, that a lot of these guys who are a fringe and are maybe playing at a position that we might have a glut of talent at, we get back less than we value them as, at least in the fan base, just because they fit really well with the Ravens culture, but outside of that, maybe not. I still think Chuck Clark, I still think that he's more valuable to teams than what we got from him, but I digress. Anyways, agree with what you're saying with Wallace. I really hope that we get to see him get some snaps, get in some packages this year, make some impact plays in the regular season, because that's really been what he's been lacking. I mean, outside of special teams, he's improved each preseason, like you're saying. He had touchdowns in each of the first 2 games, almost had one this last one. There certainly is growth there, and I don't know if he's a guy who we can expect more than a couple catches from this year, but even if that's what he does, I think that's great for him. That's putting your career in the right direction, a stepping stone. Of course, injuries can happen. We're looking at Odell coming off a big injury. He's been in there for a while. Bateman, hopefully he can play a full season, but his injury history the past 2 years, you never know. Duvernay's been pretty durable, but he did get hurt last year. Aguilar is incredibly durable, but you never know. I mean, Kyle Fuller last year, he had never really gotten hurt in his career, and then he gets hurt for the season before halftime of the first game. So Wallace, yeah, I don't know yet how comfortable I am if he has to play meaningful snaps, but certainly showing growth, and that's all you can ask for. And then we'll just have to see how that translates to games that actually matter.
Sure thing. So going into the tight end position, there was kind of a conversation, I think, last week about, Vokalek versus Kolar. And this game was kind of a flip script. Kolar played quite well. Vokalek kind of didn't show up too much. Maybe they were hiding him. And I think it kind of solidified that Kolar's going to be that third for sure, which I don't think was too out of the question last week. But and I feel like they're trying to maybe hide Vokalek. That's my guess. And maybe be able to bring him back quietly to the practice squad. So I don't know what you think there.
Do you really hide someone, though, by not playing them in the third preseason game? I mean, the highlights still exist from the first two. It's not like you take them off the field and then those become erased from everywhere. Like, just snapped out of existence.
Don't need him to flash again,
Right. Sure, yeah. You don't need it to repeat.
The classic thing, man. You got 1 dot, that's a point. You got 2 lines, or 2 points, that's a line. 3 points, you got a trend, No trend.
There you go. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what someone in Vokalek's position could do to earn a spot over even a guy like Kolar. Like, sure, he's definitely unquestionably behind Andrews, and almost certainly behind Likely, just because of what Likely was able to do last year. So no fault of Kolar's own. He just didn't see the field. But yeah, I don't really think he did anything to lose the spot. And he made big plays in the second and third game. I can't remember if he really did much in the first game. Oh, that's right. That was the game he had the fumble, but then the next play got out of bounds. Yeah, I think that he is someone we need to keep, though. And Vokalek, again, what are we going to be able to do roster gymnastics that would allow us to keep him? That's going to be interesting and a tough one. And I guess one other thing to talk about here, Ricard. Do we think he's on the team?
I said yes. I mean, that's the way you get Vokalek on, is if you cut Ricard or you play some gymnastics. I personally feel like there might be some sort of, attempt to get him to renegotiate his contract at this point, because they have a little bit of ammunition with the Vokalek thing. But I don't know, man. The Ricard thing's an interesting byproduct. You see these changes in regimes, and then suddenly players that were like second-round draft picks are never used because they just don't fit what the guys are trying to do. And I kind of feel like that's what's going on here with Ricard. Heavily used, and now it's like a little bit more difficult to see how he might get a fit in this team and this offense. But I think they will, like I said last week, they're more creative than I am. They'll figure out ways that they can use him, and I think they're just going to ride out the contract this year. If he got cut, it would not surprise me, right? But I just don't see him going that direction. But I will say, I feel like it was a smoking gun that he was trying to out at offensive line. I swear they were trying to pull some real shenanigans there. So that's what made me concerned that he might not be a lock.
Yeah, I mean, so another reason to take into consideration, and maybe not everyone's going to agree with me on this, but I think Ricard is virtually a lock just because of his veteran status on this team. I understand we have a new offensive coordinator, but the head coach is the same. We're certainly going to see different players used in different manners, but a change in offensive coordinator is not a change in head coach. And Harbaugh, we know, is very loyal to his guys, particularly those who have tenure. I think Ricard is a guy who has tenure. And Monken, what was the big thing with him when we brought him in? He's a guy who adapts, right? He adapts to what the strengths are of a team and kind of has a malleable game plan in that sense. I think he's going to try any which way to get Ricard involved because he sees a guy. I mean, I imagine he sees a guy who's an incredibly talented blocker, regardless of what your feeling is of how much he's out on the field. Like, we know that. And he might have some creative ways of using him, and we're talking again also about tight end with Boyle no longer on the team, and Likely and Kolar really much better receivers than they are blockers. That's an area of need on this team is another guy there who can go down there in the trenches and block on running plays. So, yeah, I agree that the path to snaps is not clear with regard right now, at least from what we're assuming, right? We haven't really seen this offense in full strength yet, so we're making guesses here as to what it's going to be. I'd like to think they're educated guesses, but they're still assumptions. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and we'll see. He might try some different things with the card. He might be more involved early in the season, and then it's not really working, so he's on the field less and less as the year goes on. But in short, I think with his tenure, they're going to try and make it work and just see what happens.
I think there might be a point differential thing too. It's like, they're up by 14.
Sure.
In the fourth quarter, it's like the Ricard package. He subs in as quarterback. I jest. But talking about a blocker and Ricard, let's go to the offensive line. And Peter, why don't you lead off with your offensive line predictions?
Yeah. So I guess to start at tackle, Stanley and Moses, obviously. Makari, depending on where you want to put him, and then Falele seems to be. Were there some moments during preseason where he was still getting beat, where he wanted to see quicker feet? Sure, but I think that he's still a prospect they're going to like. I think his spot's pretty safe. And then interior, of course, you got Zeitler. He's obviously there. Linderbaum. My guy, John Simpson, really excited. John Harbaugh announced him as the starter. I think he's going to fit really well in that line. I don't know what his ceiling is, but I think he'll be, at worst, solid. And then this is where it gets interesting. Andrew Voorhees is not playing this year. Still recovering from injury, so he'll be on the IR. And then you've got Saleh. We talked about him, late round draft pick. Did not run away with the competition at all. Simpson clearly beat him. And then there's also Ben Cleveland, a guy who, based on snaps in preseason and from what we've heard from camp, the Ravens seem to like Saleh a little better. But as we have here in the notes, it's not quite clear that Cleveland is a downgrade from Saleh. Saleh has tools you like, certainly has things he needs to work on, particularly, I think, at times, strength and pass protection. And Cleveland is still showing that he needs to grow a little bit as well in his game, but at times looked very solid during this preseason, particularly in run blocking, can pancake guys with that strength. I think when you look at Saleh in Cleveland, you're looking at guys, and there's pros and cons to each. So I think they'll keep Cleveland around for another year, but he could be a guy that if they're really getting down to a roster crunch, might be in danger. Yeah,
man. I think this is the hardest one in a way. There's all this bad juju around Cleveland, just bad vibes. Vibe check is not high around Cleveland, but he's just played well. He's just played well this preseason. He's completely outplayed Saleh. I think it's undeniable that he's outplayed Saleh. And I don't think it's even close. So, to me, keeping Saleh around and not keeping Cleveland is malpractice. So they have to keep him. That's my thought. They kind of have to keep him or trade him. If they can trade him for something, that might be a good reason. I've been over here being like, they got to IR Saleh. Just like find a hangnail, find anything. I just don't even want to see him maybe even this year. They're not talking about him that way. It seems unrealistic. That's just kind of where I'm at with him. I think it's just, it almost feels like an overreaction, I think, though, to my deep desire to keep Cleveland around. Because, you never wish for injury, but I'm over here thinking to myself, if either of these guards go down, I'd much rather have Cleveland go in than Saleh at this point. Maybe use McCary instead. I actually list him as a guard in this situation because I felt more confidence with Falele. I feel like he could come in, either tackle position, and play. Not saying that they would do that first. I'm just saying I think he could. So, anyways, I'm really worried about the Cleveland thing. I think they keep Mustafa because they want to back up center. I think didn't Cleveland play 2 snaps at center last year or something?
Yeah, it was a very short-lived experiment.
Right, the guy has horrible bend, so I don't see that happening. But anyhow, I digress. I'm just over here kind of tilting my head off about how they're gonna keep 10 linemen, which doesn't feel likely, but there's 10 pretty clear-cut people that they would probably intend to keep. So this is a tricky one. This is where for those wondering at home, this is exactly where you use like one of the defensive handcuffs, or not handcuffs, handshakes. Use a defensive handshake, and I think we're going to overload the offensive side this year. So there'll be like a 26 offensive person and only 24 defensive people, because all the handshakes are defensive players. There's no offensive players you can do similar shenanigans with.
That's the only way you're going to make it work, right? We talked about this prior to recording. It's guys 5+ years in the league making the vet minimum, and I mean, it's not even anyone like who's in danger of not even making the team, right? There's literally no player who falls under that category on the offense, at least not that I can think of.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, but let's move on then to defense, I guess. And one of the players that could be used as a handshake is right here on the first group that we're going to talk about, defensive line. You're looking at the guys who are locks: Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce, and a guy who the Ravens probably want to have on here, but is making the vet minimum, has been around the league for a bit, is Brent Urban. I think he provides really solid depth. He's got some athleticism and length that you really like there. The length in particular, he's got a different build than you're getting from the rest of those guys. So I think he's useful in certain situations due to that. He's been really good against the run for us. So Brent Urban, I think, will be part of this final roster, but he is a prime candidate for being used as a handshake deal to get some of these offensive guys on, if that's the direction that the Ravens feel like they need to go.
Yeah, they'll almost certainly use him. He was interviewed last year by Ken McCusick, and he asked about that exact thing. Like, the Ravens keep cutting you to do this exact, maneuver, and he's understanding of it. And we know that his wife is like quite keen on him staying here. I think he wants to stay here. He's always featured prominently in Ravens media. I feel like the photographs, the mic'd ups, etc. So I mean, I feel like he's a player that's pretty well loved within the organization, and he makes a lot of sense. I think Blackson also has played quite well this preseason, and I think they have plans for him. I just don't know exactly how they're going to make it work to bring him back. Like, which player isn't available, which player's hurt. But I do anticipate both those players being a part of the future with this team to augment the first four we talked about.
I think one more guy to talk about there who would be a practice squad, I think, if anything. But yeah, I like what they saw from Rayshon Nichols this preseason. I'm trying to think, though, how he would fit into the calculus here, if he would have a path to the roster or practice squad.
Yeah, I mean, him and Caesar both feel like guys that could easily be a part of the practice squad. I anticipate one of them being there, but also we do tend to lose defensive linemen that are on our practice squad to other teams. So I'm very curious who we don't keep gets claimed at this point, because we all are biased to like want to protect our guys. I'm sure we don't know the bubble players of many other rosters, if any at all. So we're over here being like worried that they're going to get claimed, but there's other people in the bubble that I'm sure other teams want to get back on their practice squad. They're familiar with their scheme and everything. So it's probably less people than we think, but I do think it wouldn't surprise me the defensive line is a picked on resource.
Moving on to edge rusher. Roster locks for here. Looks like it would be Odafe Owe, David Ojabo, Jadeveon Clowney, newly on the team, Tavius Robinson. Those are going to be the locks, right? We do have another name on here that I think is an interesting one to talk about, and that's Malik Ham, who had a pretty strong preseason being undrafted here. And the injury to Bowser, we're still not getting a ton of information on there, but it would seem that he's going to start the year on the IR. So that opens up a spot, because edge, you want more than 4, ideally. Ham would seem to be the guy who would get that call of all the guys who played in preseason. I think he was the one who showed the most promise, showed the most variety of what he could do out there. I don't think he's a lock by any sense, but certainly someone I think who is a candidate. He wouldn't be shocked if that is someone who they would keep on the final roster.
Yeah, I had a Ham there, but I would have taken him away for like the final exercise for no other reason than I think he's the classic person we just talked about. Like, we probably covet more than anyone else. You could probably very likely sneak to the practice squad, so you could in this example here that we're kind of looking at, Salah's not in it, but I could see them keeping Salah and then cutting Ham because it's more likely that you can sneak Ham. But I do really like Ham. I want him to be a part of this team, and I'd be looking for any stone I can turn in order to do it. He played quite well, and I think a lot of them did. I wouldn't be surprised if Sanders sticks around. I think we actually did a pretty decent job identifying edge players that could stick around. And it kind of makes me sad. We have a guy like Robinson, who I'm not quite sure how he contributes this year, if at all. And I'm over here seeing like ways that we probably could use Ham, and I'm over here like, I want to practice squad Ham though, and keep Robinson. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of frustrating that there's like a couple players that we have on this roster who I'm not saying are going to be busts and they're not going to work out, but I just don't see how they work out this year. And yeah, kind of go from there.
Yeah, I agree with that. At least what it looks like post preseason. The other thing to remember though is that the preseason is a different game, and there'll be guys who stand out in the preseason and then just never put it together. You watch them in the regular season, it just doesn't work out. And then conversely, there are guys who don't have terrible preseasons, and then they turn it on when the games are for real.
I remember when Chase couldn't catch the ball. Those are good times.
Exactly. Yep. Or even like someone like Mark Andrews. Remember his first, technically he played a full 4 preseason games since I was 5 that year, and he was total trash. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, in that final preseason game, he looked like an all-pro, and then we know what happened after that. But yeah, sometimes it takes guys a little bit longer. But yeah, a guy like Tavius Robinson, we knew he was going to be a developmental guy. Didn't really show much of anything this preseason to make it look like a guy that you're really going to be expecting things from going forward. But a lot can change. We'll see. I'm certainly not writing him off. But yeah, I agree right now. If we're just going off what we saw with preseason and not taking anything else into consideration, you're a little more excited with a guy like Ham right now than Robinson.
Yep. I guess moving along to inside linebacker, another interesting position point. Do the Ravens keep 5? Do they keep 4? And there's a lot of players there that have some flexibility. The 3 that are pretty much locked up at this point are Queen, Smith, and Simpson. But Alshon Phillips has played out of his mind. I quite like him. And then Harrison has that positional versatility of playing edge, Sam, or thumper linebacker. So I think they keep both. That's my guess. But then that you have Welsh and Ross hitting, waivers. I think Welsh gets claimed. I think Welsh goes somewhere for sure. And I think maybe Ross, you can sneak him on to the practice squad again. I think it's likely that he'll be able to go onto the practice squad, but it's definitely an interesting decision point. He didn't get to play much this preseason, so I think he's out. As far as, I guess I'm saying, like, he's surely not going to make the primary 53, but I could see him definitely stick around as practice squad.
Yeah, it definitely did not have the impact this preseason that he did last season, which is unfortunate. But Phillips had a really strong preseason. Again, we're talking about another guy who outperformed a guy we drafted this year in Simpson. But again, Phillips, he's been around the league for a little bit. He's not an undrafted guy. He's a vet, even though he really hasn't gotten that many opportunities yet at this time in his career. There's opportunity for him. Again, is he going to play when the things, when the lights are on? In some ways, it reminds you of, what was his name, Steven Means from last year. Now, granted, with Means, we just never really got a chance to see what he could do with this defense because he was injured. I think he only lasted to game 2. It was very short time before he was on IR. So we can't really make any fair comparison, but a guy like Steven Means was pretty invisible when he did finally get playing time, again, in a short sample size. But yeah, I mean, the thing with Phillips, though, is when we're talking about depth outside of Roquan and Queen, like, Malik has shown flashes at times, but if he has to play significant snaps due to an injury to either Queen or Smith, I think that we're a little nervous about that. Would Phillips be better? I don't know, but at least you keep him on the roster and you have that option in the unfortunate case that you need it, right? So, yeah, I think that he's a strong candidate to make the roster. not a lock, but certainly someone I think that the coaches are taking a really strong look at to see if there's a way they can make it work and what he can contribute.
What do you think about the corners?
What do I think about the corners? I see that you were not, you didn't want to just dive right into that one.
I mean, I can start if you want.
I mean, the corners, this is really, there's just so much we don't know here, right? We don't know what Marlon's status is going to be for this year at all. When is he going to come back? What shape is he going to be when he comes back, right? Rock Ya-Sin is a question mark. We know what he's done other places. How does he fit into this defense? Who is this Darby guy? Does anyone know? He's been around a lot of places. We'll see. Brandon Stevens had an up and down preseason. Caillou, where do we start with this group? Where do we start? Those are the names. There's a couple others too.
So many names. This is the part that broke my spreadsheet. I'm over here and I'm like, I ran out of slots. I need to make a bigger, move this row down so I can fit more in this column. All right, so I think Marlowe comes back pretty quickly. I don't think he's going to be IR'd. I think he's back in the first 4 games. That's good. Then you have Rock and Darby. Hopefully, Rock's back in practicing soon. I don't know if he is or not. I can't remember, but hopefully he's ready. So you have Rock and Darby as your starters. Maybe Stevens in there as well to back up. Ardarius won the slot role. We're taking for granted Ardarius is going to make the roster at this point, but that was not clear at the beginning of this process. So congrats to him for playing his butt off, And there's all this speculation that we have to keep Pepe around so we can IR him. And I mean, I know it's true, but I'm just I'm not sold that Pepe deserves a roster spot. He's in the same phylum as JAD, Caillou, what have you done for me ever, really? Pepe had a little bit of promise in the preseason. He had all that dog, but it didn't really transfer to the regular season. Got injured, kind of lost a year developmentally. JAD has barely played football in his whole entire life. He got peppered in the preseason game, gave me no confidence. That's a note from the game. Heavily targeted, not great, horrible tackler, just horrendous tackling. Just a piss poor effort in my opinion. And then Caillou, and I'm never negative, guys. You know what I mean? I try to say the positive, but JD just has not impressed me yet from that perspective. And then Caillou, up and down games, lots of down, makes you concerned about everything. And we had a little conversation before the show, but I think it's worth reiterating. I'm over here thinking, what happened to the Ravens' ability to draft cornerbacks? The last couple of years, they're on the clock. We want a cornerback. They pick JAD and they pick Pepe. We're over here, a bunch of YouTubers, podcast personalities being like, hey, that Woolen guy looks pretty good. Maybe they should draft Woolen. And it turns out to be a stud. And then they go and take Caillou, and we're over here being Ringo was no longer available when they picked Caillou. We were talking about guys like Rush, Ricks, and then Eli Ricks gets a pick 6 against us and had a good camp, and you're just man, I'm over here just wondering we didn't even have Caillou on the board. We had all these lovely guys we want to take a flyer on. I can't remember when Brent's was high. I think Brent's was taken in the second, so we wouldn't have had a chance on him. But there's all these beautiful corners, lots of corners. I know the Steelers got one. He got injured though. He got hurt. But anyways, all that to say, they draft this Caillou guy, and now I don't even know how you get a roster spot. You're over here doing gymnastics. And luckily, it's not as dire of a situation as we're making it out to be. I do think Seymour is a handshake they're going to utilize. So he doesn't make the 53, but he'll be back. And I think Seymour's quite good. And then Worley is whatever you think he is. If you think he's a safety, he's a safety. If you think he can still play corner, he's a corner. I think he's a little bit of both, but I think he comes back too on a handshake deal. So while we don't include him in the conversation, these are 2 veteran players that can play well and contribute to this team that do provide depth. But you look at these young guys and you're just what are you going to do for me this year? We're trying to win a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? So, and who else we didn't talk about? Hayes. They lose Marlowe. They go in desperation mode. They bring all these guys off the street, and Hayes plays out of his mind. He's completely outplayed JAD and Caillou. But we're not even talking about him making a roster spot because every team in the NFL has had a chance to get this guy off waivers. He's only his like 8th team, and we have him now, and he looks good. But that's gets back to what we were talking about earlier, man. It's killer that you have all these players you want to keep for developmental purposes, but like they're not. If we need to throw them in right now, give me Hayes. So it's a difficult balance this year.
Yeah, it really is. And it's crazy. The Ravens do such a great job with drafting, but I mean, you can't be perfect. And for whatever reason, we see it that every now and again, it feels like we kind of go in a lull with certain position groups where we just get backed up in being able to draft them. We're focusing on the positions, I guess. I guess the board doesn't fall in our favor. These players that we're shouting out, maybe something in the scouting department said, nah, this guy's not really it. Or maybe they are just misses. They're not perfect. As good as the Ravens are at drafting, they are certainly capable, just like any other organization, of missing guys who are true vets. You look at this secondary right now, what really makes you feel good about it, I shouldn't say feel good, but not as bad, is the safety position and linebacker, which we'll get to. But you're looking at it right now with, I guess, starting in week 1, you're going to have Rock Ya-Sin and Darby on the boundaries, Washington in the slot, and that'll work against Houston, but what's it going to be the rest until Marlon's going to be able to come back? A lot of questions, yeah. But, yeah, so when you look at that, yeah, I think Rock is definitely there. Obviously, Darby, Stevens, and Ardarius, those 4. And then I guess Pepe and JAD and Caillou make it because they're draft picks that have only been around a little bit, and you want to see what else you get from them. But they certainly don't seem like they're ready to be playing meaningful snaps yet at this point. So hopefully the vet guys can stay healthy, and that's just what it's going to be. But just the way the past couple seasons have gone, I do not feel good about this group, and I'm really hoping that we're not going to have to see the back 9 of this, but it feels like too much of a possibility, particularly with Marlowe already having an injury that he claims. I see an article here on BaltimoreRavens.com. Marlon's claiming he feels like he could play today. We know Marlon says a lot of crazy things, so take that for what you will. But yeah, hopefully that will be a short one because we're going to need him this year.
Absolutely. Going into this, man, like, do you see which one of these guys? So, like, I guess I'll pose it to you this way: the Ravens decide they're cutting one JAD or Caillou Kelly. Which one do you keep?
Just of those two, Pepe's definitely staying.
Sure. I mean, you can add Pepe to the group. Is that the one you would cut?
Okay.
I think I would too, but I think there's an injury settlement or something.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can do it.
I mean, it's so tough because we've seen so little of them, and I am intrigued with Caillou. I think that he certainly has some things he needs to work on, but he has physical tools that I think are really intriguing. So I would go JID in that situation, which we'll see. Hopefully in a couple of years, we look back on this, and this is as ridiculous as you cutting Chuck Clark back in 2019 for that special teams guy we can't even remember. But that's where I would go right now. I think that Pepe has shown a little more. And Caillou, I just don't feel comfortable giving up on him yet, just due to him having trouble out of the gate with the physical tools that he has. So, yeah, right now that's what I'm saying. But that's a tough call. That is a tough call right there. For sure. I think I would take JAD, which sounds terrible because he's done nothing to impress me. And what I feel like Caillou's done a little bit more. Yeah. But I don't know. That's like, yeah, ask me in 30 minutes, I might change. And then right,
to wrap
exactly,
up,
yeah.
And then to wrap up, you got safety position. I guess not to wrap up. I think take one quick step back before we talk about safeties. The Jason from Hollywood Films might have been the first person to say it, but he was like, "What if we cut Ott? What if we have no long snapper?" And it's not the worst thing I've ever heard in my life because he's the vet min. He's a handshake candidate, 100%. But another team, he is also a Pro Bowl long snapper. So, another team could try to get him for more, and then we'd be really SOL. I don't think they want to play with that fire, but I thought it was very innovative, and I thought it was a cool idea to just completely punt a position and know you're going to get it back, kind of thing. But
yeah, that's a fun one over drinks. But yeah, I agree. That is playing with way too much fire, I think.
Yeah,
even if it's
it had to be the most locked in handshake. You don't even let them out of your sight.
Right? Yeah, it's really like you're cut. Here's your room over here, just next to Coach's office. We got you a bed here.
It's a Faraday cage too. He can't get no messages from his agent or any other.
Here's the Wi-Fi code.
And then they slide him a contract underneath the door, and he has to sign and put it back before they let him.
Actually, what am I talking about? He's not getting a Wi-Fi code. He could communicate with teams there. No, he's getting some old magazines there.
Yeah. Oh man. But yeah. Anyways, let's assume they're not going to do that. Make it a little bit harder. I only had us keeping 3 safeties, which is kind of funny and also not entirely true because Stevens and Ardarius could be considered a safety in some parlances. But just Hamilton, Stone, and Marcus Williams. Stone didn't have the greatest game, though, in the preseason. He got some preseason action and didn't look like the Geno Stone from last year, who in the preseason was absolute dynamite, and in the regular season, very, very serviceable. So hopefully it was just a bad game, a little bit of bad mojo, get the kinks out, but something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to make of that. That surprised me in the game, but again, I think you got to look at his track record, and hopefully it was just a matter of he's missed some time, he needs to get his conditioning back a little bit, and then he'll be ready to go. I'm not worrying too much about it. It was surprising, but players have bad games, even in preseason sometimes, I guess, which it's a little more surprising there because Stone should be at a higher level than those guys. I mean, I guess. Tampa did go out with some starters, didn't they? Godwin was out there. Baker. I don't know if they had anyone else, but yeah. I think Stone will be good this year.
I hope so, too. I haven't lost hope because of this game. It's just something to kind of point out. So, yeah, I feel like that was kind of the game, man, or the roster prediction situation. Anything else you wanted to talk about?
Tucker Stout, Ott. They're there.
Keeping them. We're not playing any shenanigans. No hostage situation. I'm sure Ott's a fine dude and trustworthy. It's for entertainment purposes only.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think the number one thing I'm going to do, man, when the roster comes out tomorrow at 4:00, my eyes are going to dart down to offensive line, dart down to corner, and then taking the rest. I remember last year being so surprised by some of the options, and then you saw like Josh Oliver become a huge piece, gets a big contract, generates a comp pick. What a guy! No one had him on their 53s, but then he pulled it off.
He did.
But we'll be back soon with preview, man. This is exciting. A preview of a regular season football game against the Houston Texans. Working on finding a guest for that. And then, we'll be trucking along. But regular football, full-fledged football starts in 12 days. And I could not be more excited.
It's crazy how close it is. And, man, ready for it. I love the long Labor Day weekend. It's always great. But unfortunately, that it's also long because you're like, it's the last weekend before football. Last one.
Yeah, I'm not even looking forward to next weekend. I don't know. Are you doing anything for Labor Day?
No.
Yeah, I don't acknowledge the holiday. In fact, actually, I'm like worried I'm going to go to work. Like, I never made that mistake in my life. I'm pretty sure like over the next week it'll be beaten into my head. But I've completely forgotten it's a thing. I'm over here like thinking of, about Monday at work, and I don't have to go anywhere on Monday. So, yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoy your Labor Day. If we don't talk to you before then. Enjoy making your 53-man roster predictions. Curious what you think about all of that. And we'll see you soon talking about real football. Go Ravens.